This is Pod Populi, podcasts for the people.
Welcome back to the Wedding Buzz. It's your host, Sydney. And today I am so excited because we're going to take it back to the beginning. It is engagement season. And I just want to say congratulations. You're engaged. This is such an exciting time in your life. But now you might be thinking, now what? This can be overwhelming and everyone's going to start asking you questions and giving you their opinions. Your For You feed on social media might start showing you every idea in the book. And let me tell you, this all costs more than you think. But let me stop for a second because I don't want to overwhelm you. Let's go back to why we are here. You just got engaged. Don't forget what that means. You decided to spend your life with someone and they decided to spend their life with you. This is way bigger than just a wedding to plan. Although I'm a wedding planner, I do love a big fancy party, but I don't want anyone to lose sight of what really matters and forget why we are celebrating. So first, congratulations. Hop some bubbly and celebrate this decision you have both made. Soak it in because I promise you, time goes by really fast. With that said, I once upon a time, a few short years ago, was also engaged. And I actually got engaged on Christmas. So it was this time of year during all the craziness that I also got engaged. And I loved planning my wedding. But sometimes I do think about it that I was overwhelmed when I first got engaged, like anybody else. And I had worked in the wedding industry prior to this. I didn't have my own company quite yet, but I had worked in the wedding industry at the time. And so I think about sometimes that if I felt overwhelmed and this, oh my gosh, I'm engaged, yay, but I have so much to do. If I felt that overwhelm, I am so sure that others feel it. I actually know that others feel it because I have couples all the time to come to me that say, I just got engaged and I'm freaking out, which is typically why they're hiring a planner. But I don't want anyone to feel like this. I want to help you as much as possible. Obviously, if you are in my area or want to work with me, I would love to help you. But even if you are far away or you're not looking necessarily for a planner, I do want to at least help you walk through the first few steps of what to do now that you're engaged. So let's do this. I'm going to guide you on where to start after saying yes. I promise you that this process can be fun and stress-free with a little organization. You definitely will have decisions to make, but you got this one thing at a time. So first, let's take some time to celebrate. Like I said, don't forget why we are celebrating. So take some time to celebrate. Take the time to soak in the moment and your excitement before diving into the planning. You can celebrate with a big engagement party or take some quiet moments together, but soak it in and enjoy one another. Once you've taken time to enjoy each other, let's talk about the actual planning of where to start and what to do when you're first engaged. I want you to set up a good foundation. So I hate to say it, but yes, we're going to talk about budget. I know it's no fun, but hear me out. You can't look at venues or vendors if you don't have an estimated budget. I don't want you looking for a venue that is double your budget, falling in love with it, and then realizing that it's just not possible. You also will have no idea if your vendor choices are realistic or not if you don't have a budget. So let's make a budget and let's make sure this is realistic. I have a couple right now who is having to ask family for more help. And I actually had a meeting with people in the family and they're talking about taking out another line of credit because it turns out the budget that they told me isn't actually doable for them. And I think that they thought family would be more on board than they are. I think they thought they would be able to handle some of these bills without family's help. And turns out they're a little tighter. I say this with no judgment because I get it. Things are expensive, things creep up, things add up more than they think. But even with a transparent budget conversation in the beginning and knowing how much things are costing, I think it's still taking them a bit by surprise. And I think it's not that the the amount they're spending is taking them by surprise, but how hard it is to actually balance that with their day to day and their bills that they already have prior to wedding planning. So I don't want you to fall into this. And I want you to have a realistic budget from the start because, like this situation, even if you have a planner, if you tell me a budget, I can help plan a wedding in that budget, but I'm not looking at your financial statements. I'm not asking your salary and how much you actually get paid. That's private information that I never need to know. So you need to do the work prior and figure out how much money can you actually allocate towards this wedding. And if you have family that you think are going to chip in, don't count on their budget until they have told you an exact amount. Because the other thing is that different generations have different ideas of how much a wedding should cost. I don't mean to be stereotypical, but it's just true. The older generations don't think that a wedding should cost as much as it does today. And now that might just be an opinion. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but if you tell them that you're expecting X amount of dollars, that might be very different than the amount of money they had in mind to give you. Even if they say, yes, we want to help you with the wedding, they might be thinking, yes, we want to give you $5,000. And to you, when they say we want to help you with the wedding, you might be thinking, hey, that means they're going to give me $50,000. That's a big difference. You have to have these conversations prior to starting any sort of wedding planning. So, talk with your family, talk with your spouse. I suggest that you have a goal number and then an absolute max number because things pop up, things happen. So, plan for your goal number. And then if things do pop up, you at least have a little bit of wiggle room. Finances are personal, but I just suggest that you have a wedding within your means. Don't go into a ton of debt and start your marriage financially drowning. Finances are a huge topic of frustrations for couples. So I highly recommend not overspending on the wedding and then regretting it later. So the next thing that you need to think about is your guest count. Figure out an estimated guest count. You can't choose a venue without knowing how many guests you're going to have. I don't mean to say like pick a random number. Oh, I want 50 guests. I mean, literally sit down, write out a whole list, include spouses, include plus ones. Ask your spouse who they might want. Do they want their coworkers there or old friends that you don't even really know, but they were childhood friends and it would mean a lot for them to come to the wedding? And then even though I think it's your day and everything should be the way you want it, I do think that it's respectful to ask your parents and your spouse's parents who they feel should be there. This is a big day for your parents as well, especially if they're chipping in and paying for it. I personally feel that if they are helping pay for the wedding, they should be able to invite a few of their friends or a few people that are special to them that would be meaningful for them to have at your wedding. Some people strongly disagree with me, and that's totally fine. If you're paying for the wedding completely yourself, then yeah, have whoever you want. But I just think out of respect, ask your parents who they'd like to have and let them come. I asked for my own wedding, my mother-in-law, and she invited a few people that I had never met, but they were good friends. They had known my husband since he was a little kid. And, it didn't mean so much to my husband, but it meant a lot to his parents. And they didn't bother me on the wedding day. Okay. So ask your whole family who needs to be there. And then, you know, you can always cut people off this list, but at least ask and get a realistic number of how many guests you're looking at for your wedding. Okay, now this part might be hard because everyone is going to have a different vision for their wedding, a different guest count for their wedding, and different budgets. But I want to try something with you guys. So, if you're wanting a more simple, budget friendly wedding, I want you to take your guest count and multiply it by $250. So for 100 guests, this would be $250 times 100 guests, which is $25,000. That means for 100 guests, you can expect to pay around $25,000. And again, in South Florida, which is where I am, that would be a nice wedding, but more of a budget friendly wedding. If you're looking to have more of a grand wedding, more upscale, and you're wanting a Pinterest board to absolutely come to life, I would multiply your guest count by around $600 to $800. So 100 guests times $600 is $60,000. Now, stay with me here. I want you to do the same little exercise, but change your guest count. So for this second example, if you take 75 guests instead of 100 guests, so 75 guests times that $600, it's 45,000. That's a difference of $15,000 just by changing the guest count. Of course, there's so many factors that go into it, depending on which florists you pick and which DJs you pick, but this is just a high level example of how your guest count can really change your budget. If you bump that guest count to 150 guests, so we started at 100, we went down to 75. Now let's bump it all the way up to 150 guests times $600. That's $90,000. So this is a huge difference just based off of guest count. So obviously, it totally depends on the food you're serving, the location, the quality of vendors, and the amount of decor and florals, but it's a good ballpark example of how your guest count will impact your budget. Another little side note, when you are looking at cost per person, this is not just for food. If the cost per person is $600, maybe 200 to 300 of that is food, and that's obviously an upscale wedding. But don't forget that you need tables, chairs, centerpieces, chargers, etc. So even if your cost per person is $100, maybe 30, 40 of that is food, but there are other things that go into that cost per person. So you also need to think about taxes and fees, but I don't want to super overwhelm you for now. So just think about an overall budget, talk to your family about the budget, talk to your family about the guest count. If you want to do some math, you can try to follow along with what I was just saying. If math is super overwhelming to you, forget that. Just figure out how many guests and what your overall budget is. You later are going to have to put all the puzzle pieces together and add it up to make sure that you are in that budget. If you're way over budget, I suggest limiting your guest count. That is really the key here. If you cannot scrape up the money and cannot figure out how you're going to make this happen, I highly suggest that you cut down your guest count. Or if you don't want to cut down your guest count, you're going to have to scale it back. The wedding cannot be a beachfront, fancy, big wedding. If you have to have a lot of guests, you're going to have to scale it back, maybe do a food truck. It still can be beautiful. It still can be fun, but these are choices you have to make and things you need to think about from the very beginning. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Okay, welcome back. And so now that we got some of the really not fun things figured out, guest count, budget, not fun, but we have to talk about it from the get-go. I know I did math. I'm so sorry. It's never fun to do math, but hopefully you were able to kind of follow along with that math. But now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about your wedding vision. This is a lot more fun. Think about defining your style and your must-haves and make a list to help you narrow down your venue search. I do truly believe that we can transform any space into a beautiful venue, but that does take a lot of money. And so I do suggest that you pick a venue that you love rather than trying to change it. I do have a bride right now who I feel like she really doesn't like her venue. Every time we go there or talk about it, she's pointing out things that she does not like. And I'm not blaming her for some of these things, but I kind of wonder why she picked this venue if there are so many parts of it that she doesn't like, and we're draping the whole place and really doing a lot of work to transform it. And I think it's going to be beautiful. And I'm praying that she's really happy on the wedding day. But it's costing a lot of money to do the draping and adding floral and doing all these other things, when sometimes I think if there was a different venue that she liked better, maybe it would have been more expensive from the get-go, but she wouldn't have had to pay for all this draping and florals and other things to transform the space. So again, that's no hate on her, but just think about this when you're choosing your venue. I would suggest not to just settle from the get-go. Really look at some options and find something that you love rather than trying to change it. when you're thinking about your venue or just your wedding in general, some questions to think about is, do you want this to be big? Do you want it to be small? Do you want a big grand wow factor, or do you want a small intimate affair? Do you want it to be formal? Do you want it to be casual? If you do something on the beach in the sand, that's typically more casual. People might be barefoot. People might be wearing sunglasses. Or do you want this to be a black tie, very formal affair? Do you want the men wearing tuxedos and the women in floor length gowns? Just some things to think about, because the venue you choose is going to determine that as well. If you choose a very upscale country club, there's no shorts and flip flops going to be happening at a country club. Or vice versa. If you want this to be a black tie affair, having a wedding in the sand on the beach, women can't be wearing floor length gowns and heels and all of that in the sand. It's just not possible. So think about this before you choose your venue. Another key factor is local or destination. Do you want it to be nearby, or do you want it to be far away? Destination wedding always sounds really, really fun, but remember that requires a lot of travel for yourself and your family. And then it also requires a lot of travel for your guests. So there might be guests who just simply can't afford to travel, so they can't afford to attend. And for you, when you're thinking about your budget, if you're doing a destination wedding, are you including, whether it's gas for long road trips, flights, hotels, and then how many times do you have to go visit the venue in the wedding planning process? Thank God it's 2024, almost 2025. So much of the planning is done via Zoom or just electronically. Typically, my out of town brides, I only end up meeting with them once or twice prior to the wedding day. If they're out of town, honestly, some of the local ones I don't even meet with that often in person. It's just easier for everyone to do a phone call or a Zoom call. But if it's a destination, there's definitely going to be some travel involved, and travel equals money. So just think about that before you make a decision. I do suggest using a Pinterest board or inspiration journal as a tool, but I do want to warn you that a lot of these photos are not reality, and don't let yourself get too carried away while looking at these. Look at the themes, look at the colors, look at shapes. And when I say shapes, I mean, like, are the flowers bunched up real tight? Are they in a ball? Are they loose and flowy and drippy? Try to look at inspiration photos to find themes, colors, shapes, texture that you like. But keep in mind that some of these things are so elaborate and they cost so much money. And honestly, today in 2024, things are a little wild. A lot of stuff is like AI, and, we all know, don't believe what we see on the internet. So take a look, try to notice patterns and things that you like, but don't get too sucked into it and attached to a photo before you find out if it's a reality or not. So the next thing I want you to think about is a season. I recommend thinking about, when do you want this wedding to be? You don't have to pick an exact date, but I would talk to your spouse and then decide, what are you looking for? 6 months away, 12 months away, years away, summer, fall, winter, spring. What do you want the weather to be like? How much time do you want to plan? Do you want to, hey, let's knock this out in 6 months and let's get cranking right now? Or do you want time? Do you want to relax for a bit and have like a year or a year and a half to get the planning done at a slow and steady pace? It's good to have these conversations going into the planning, so you know that you're on the same page and that you know what to tell the potential venues. Narrowing down the exact date is going to have a lot to do with the venue's availability, but at least have a ballpark in mind so you can tell the venue, hey, we're looking at next fall. What dates do you have? If you're saying 6 months, you're going to have to be a little bit more flexible with your venue options. They might say, okay, in 6 months, we have a Friday available or a Sunday, but we don't have any Saturdays. Not a bad option if you're trying to plan something for 6 months away. Or, your first big venue might not be available, but if you're determined to have your wedding 6 months from now, you might have to go with your number 2 venue. And that's okay. It's going to be okay. But if you're saying, 12 or 18 months and you're like, I really want this wedding to be good, I want it to be the way that I want to take my time planning, you most likely won't have so many issues finding a venue if it's like 12 to 18 months out. And if you are very picky, I suggest giving yourself time to get what you want. A year goes by, so fast. Even 18 months goes by so fast. So if you are picky and very determined to have the exact venue that you want, give yourself a year or even a year and a half to have the venue that you want in the season that you want. Just give yourself time. It goes by as fast. You won't regret it. If you have a vision in mind, you won't regret waiting for that vision to come to life. We are going to take another quick break and then we will be right back. Okay, welcome back. So now that we have our foundation budget discount out of the way, we have our, vision for the wedding and the first few, big concrete things to think about. Let's talk about vendors. So the first vendor that I would suggest you do is a venue. You can do a planner first or a venue first. It just depends on if you want the planner to help you find the venue or if you want to find a venue and then find a planner that is local to that venue. The only other thing that is a big determining factor here is that if you pick a planner first, you're not locking in a date, which can be a little tricky because if your venue has October 15th available, but that planner doesn't have October 15th available, then you're in a little bit of a pickle because you've already signed up with the planner, but they can't do this date that you want with the venue. It gets a little tricky. I offer this to guests and just say, or not to guests, I offer this to my couples if they want me to help them find a venue. And I just say, hey, you'll have first come, first serve as far as dates. We pick maybe 3 or 4 dates that are top priority that I'm available, they're available. And then we go to the venues and say, hey, this is what we're really looking for. And usually we're able to make it work. I really wouldn't do this with a couple looking less than 6 months away. But if we have time and they want to hire me first, they want help finding a venue because looking for a venue can be a little overwhelming as well. Totally get it. Just want you to have that in mind when you're deciding whether to pick a venue first or a planner first. So a lot of couples do venue first. Most of my couples, I would say, do venue first. So let's talk about it. When you're looking at your venue, this sets the tone for everything else. This will determine the location, the theme, travel, date, etc. So if you want more advice on things to ask while touring a venue, literally my first episode of the Wedding Buzz was 10 things to ask or 10 things to think about before touring a venue. And as scary as it is for me to send you all the way back to episode 1, if you want to listen to that, I suggest that you do because I go through, my first 10 things that you need to do and questions to ask while touring a venue. And it is helpful. To do a quick recap, I want you to ask the venue, obviously, about the budget. How much does this venue cost? If catering is in-house or out of house, is there capacity? What are the extra fees? Do you have required vendors? Are there rules or restrictions? And make sure you ask about a plan B. If there's any part of this that's outside, what happens if it rains? What happens and do you like their plan B? So definitely go back to that first episode of The Wedding Buzz and listen to some things to ask your venue, but just talk about the basics with them. Next, I would recommend hiring a wedding planner early. Obviously, I am biased because I am a wedding planner, but I do think that having a wedding planner will make the whole process very easy for you. And I recommend hiring a planner early because they can help you craft the day from the beginning and there won't be issues down the road that then need cleanup. I do offer a smaller wedding package, which is where I come in at the end and kind of wrap things up and I'm there on the wedding weekend. I personally don't love this package all the time because what ends up happening is that I'm doing a lot of cleanup and it's stressful for, me, but I'm used to it at this point, but it's stressful for the couples when I come in at the end and start asking questions and they're like, I don't know the answers to these questions. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, let's figure it out now. But it's just kind of why wait till the end? And then we're doing some cleanup of mistakes. For example, I have one wedding coming up that the ceremony start time is around like 5:30. It gets dark at 5:30. So we have to do all of the family photos and stuff prior to the ceremony because we're going to run out of daylight. It's not the end of the world, but it's not what the bride had in mind. She didn't think about the sunset. Of course, she didn't think about it. She's not a wedding planner. It's her first wedding she's planning, and she's been trying to do it by herself. So I just suggest if you can allocate some of the budget to a planner, I highly suggest it. It is worth it. I know some people feel like, "Oh, I can do this on my own, or I don't have to spend the money on this," but I encourage you to not undervalue um, having peace during your engagement season and having structure and peace and just, you know, the peace of mind is really what it is. It's you have a professional in your corner throughout the journey. You know that someone else is responsible for making sure that things are going planning on time, things are going to make sense. Someone who's been there, done that, and can advise you before you make final decisions rather than having to clean things up in the end. And then another reason is just that you're going to have peace of mind, not only your whole planning process, but on the wedding day. You're going to have someone there to make sure that your vision comes to life and that everything is happening as it should. And you're not alone and you have trusted help on the actual wedding day. So if you're in South Florida, let's chat. Little subtle plug, but I know it's biased because I am a wedding planner, but I really, really don't want you to undervalue how much help it is to have a planner and just a professional in your corner to help prevent you making these mistakes. So after you have your venue and your planner, your budget, your guest count, all of this set up, the rest is just hiring other vendors and putting those small little puzzle pieces together. So if you hired a planner, they will be a big help and, get started on finding vendors that they trust. They will reach out to vendors for you. If you don't have a planner or if you hired someone just to help you at the end, this is where you have to start researching vendors, getting quotes. I do like to start with photographers because I encourage you to do an engagement photo session for a few reasons. One, it's just fun. You just got engaged. Do an engagement photo session, and you'll have these pictures to look back on this exciting time. Two, you get to know your photographer. So you can do this either before you lock them in for your wedding day and see if you really like them, or if you locked them in already, that's okay. But you can get to know them, see how they work, and then you can better understand what to expect on the wedding day. You're actually going to get more comfortable with them as well, so that on the wedding day, you're not with a stranger, you're with someone that you know. You've already met them, you've already worked with them, you already got your pictures back. You're super familiar with them at this point on your wedding day. And it just helps a lot. Take my word for it. It helps a lot when you get to know them first. So I definitely like to start with a photographer so that you can do your engagement session right off the bat. I love doing an engagement session when you're freshly engaged. It's just you're just so excited, and it really shows in the photos. So I do suggest that you do that. And then you can use those photos for your save the dates. So I do like checking off photographer first for a few reasons. And then after that, it doesn't really matter if you do your hair and makeup first or your florals first. I just suggest that you start getting quotes. I would when you're engaged, not to be super overwhelmed or feel like you have to get everything done now. But in the first few months after you have your venue, I do suggest putting time into this and really diving in, because what happens is that you get these vendors on the calendar, you book them, and then they're quiet for a long time. Your flowers, you're going to have initial conversations about what you're thinking. But at the end of the day, you're really just booking them for that date. And then a couple months prior to your wedding day, you're going to circle back and really decide what you really want to have on your wedding day, what final decisions you want to make. So I would suggest getting quotes from florists, picking one that you like best, and getting on their calendar. But don't feel like you have to make final decisions, because you have time to rework the design. Honestly, you have time to rework the design a few times. It's really about the 60-day mark before your wedding that you're going to have to start to make final decisions. As far as DJ and all the other vendors, same thing. You don't have to pick your whole music playlist now, but do your research on DJs. Pick whether you want a DJ or a band or strings and get on their calendar. The other thing that I want you to do is get quotes for as many different vendors as possible and then plug the puzzle pieces together. Because if you spend 10,000 on a venue, 5,000 on a planner, 4,000 on a photographer, you're almost at $20,000 and you've only booked 3 things. Now, if your budget is $100,000, great, no problem, you're good to go. But if your budget is $30,000 and after only 3 puzzle pieces, you're at $20,000, it's not going to add up. And if you sign these contracts, you're locked in. It's very hard to go backwards. So I suggest you collect the quotes from all the different types of vendors and then sign accordingly to who fits into your budget. I hope that that makes sense. If they're in your budget, I do recommend booking them early, again, to save the dates. Vendors can only be in one place at a time. So unless they have big teams, get on their calendar early so you can lock them in and you can always make the small decisions later. I know this was a lot of information. Getting engaged is so exciting, but the thought of planning a wedding can be so overwhelming. So I hope that this helped walk through the first few steps. To recap, first, enjoy the moment. It's going to be okay. I know it's overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Soak it in, enjoy the moment. The wedding plans will come, your day will happen, and it will all be beautiful. 2, set a foundation. Talk with your family and your spouse. Figure out a realistic budget and a realistic guest count. Those are the first 2 building blocks that you have to do. Then I said just pick your venue and your planner. You can do planner first, you can do venue first, but those are the next 2 building blocks is venue and planner. Lock in the date with both of those and then get the party started. Then start going through all your other vendors. Again, get quotes, compare it to your budget, lock in dates, and then you can figure out the smaller details later. Well, thank you guys so much for listening and congratulations. I know we're in engagement season, so I'm so sure that a lot of you are newly engaged. Congratulations. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I talked all about having a plan B for your wedding. And the week before, I talked about how to get through the holidays while wedding planning. So go check those out if you have not yet. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at delightful_planning. That is my wedding planning business, or follow the podcast on Instagram at the Wedding Buzz Podcast. Follow this podcast and leave us a review if you enjoy listening, and I will see you guys next week.